And yeah, let's jump right into our second panel, where we'll talk about law, ethics, biotechnology, and artificial intelligence. So, four different topics in a really interesting session that will be moderated by Professor Raquel Carvalho, which is an associate professor at the Law School of Universidade Católica Portuguesa. Professor Raquel will be joined by four fantastic women on different verticals. We will have Dr. Idoia Salazar on ethics and AI. She is a co-founder and president of the Observatory of the Social and Ethical Impact of Artificial Intelligence, and also an expert assisting the European Parliament on artificial intelligence. We'll also have Dr. Patricia Schufre from the Faculty of Science of University of Lisbon that will talk us about neurocomputational methods and also operations research with AI. Then Dr. Filipa Calvão, which is the president of the National Data Protection Commission and an expert on law. And finally, our keynote speaker from early morning in the USA, Xavi, which is an AI enthusiast from the American Society for Investigative Pathology, that will certainly bring us the USA perspective on law, ethics, biotech, and how these three relate with artificial intelligence. So good morning to you all, and it's very privilege for us to have you. And Xavi, please, we look forward to your keynote.
Obrigada, Hugo. I appreciate the opportunity. Hang on, give me 1 minute. May have to go all the way up. Can you see the presenter mode?
Perfect. Go ahead, please.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. As Hugo mentioned, it's super early here. As a disclaimer, I have been a little sleep deprived, so if I'm unable to answer your questions adequately, I apologize, and please feel forward to send me email or follow me on Twitter or hit me up on LinkedIn, and I'll try my best to address your questions in a better frame of mind. So for today's presentation, here's a brief outline. I'm gonna talk about a little bit about my background, some of the current AI ethics commitments that are undergoing, so the students can identify if there is anything that appeals to them. A brief introduction to ethical AI frameworks, and just building on what Tiago already mentioned, using COVID-19 as a use case and talking about it as a silver lining that really propelled the integration of AI in the healthcare ecosystem. And then I would like to share some of my own concerns, ethical concerns surrounding the use of AI in healthcare, and point everybody in the direction of data disparities. And hopefully the panel can shine a little bit more light on that with law and ethics perspective. So very briefly, I work as Director of Scientific Outreach at the American Society for Investigative Pathology, also Director of Continuing Medical Education Program for the Journal of Molecular Diagnostics, policy expert at AI Policy Exchange, and one of the leaders in Women AI Ethics Collective. So some of the things that I'm currently working on include association with organizations like Digital Pathology Organization. I'm a researcher by training, and pathology is a space that I have been working very close to. So I've been working with folks from all around the world in establishing guidelines and making recommendations on academy and industry partnership in using AI ethically in the healthcare ecosystem. I'm a strong proponent of education, and hence I always advocate for adoption of digital education, and that was briefly touched in the last panel discussion. And I think there's a need and opportunity for us to take digital education field forward to better educate masses and to be able to integrate ethics more easily, assimilate it seamlessly. There's definitely a need for standards in digital pathology, and I'm working on concept paper with some collaborators on that. I'm part of different working groups that talk about algorithmic accountability. So if any of the students are interested in that, please reach out. Also in the process of developing an AI ethics curriculum at a global scale, and looking forward to putting together the first AI ethics course as an instructor in March of next year. Mentorship is something very close to my heart. I have mentored several students in the space of AI ethics via Women in AI Ethics collective, and also right now through All Tech is Human. So if you need any advice, please feel free to reach out. So I mentioned that I'm pathology is very close to me. I recently published this article. It's a review article with a colleague, Ramagullapalli, which was featured on the cover page of the American Journal of Pathology. And it essentially, this figure that was highlighted shows the 4 pillars of interaction in the healthcare ecosystem, in pathology specifically, the pillars being patients, pathologists, institutions, and AI researchers. And we essentially described a framework on which we should build these AI platforms or algorithms, which should focus on privacy and safety, definitely on fairness and inclusiveness. They should be accessible. They should not have any bias associated with them. They should put human and societal values front and center. They should be accountable, and governance and policy should be placed appropriately to make these algorithms approachable, sustainable, and scalable. And of course, these AI algorithms should be transparent. So just to make it a little bit more broader, these frameworks apply to any AI algorithm used in any sector or industry. So I'm gonna sort of couple them together just to keep things broad. So ethical AI should focus on preservation, reliability, and confidentiality. And it becomes paramount when we're talking about patient data. Data safety and data privacy is needed for many reasons, especially in the US, since I'm providing the US perspective. If your pharma company has access to your healthcare data, then your premium can change, or even these pharma companies can deny coverage in certain instances, which would be against human rights. Impartiality and fairness. Again, we have to put human rights front and center. A focus on equality, and I would like to emphasize equity in the current setting, and also diversity. Our AI platforms would be as good and as usable as diverse our data are. Accountability and transparency. It should work in the interest of public. It should be explainable. We have been seeing a lot of instances where folks are questioning why an algorithm was built, or sometimes those were unintended uses, sometimes they were intended misuses, and sometimes it was just unforeseen, unintended usages. So there should be accountability, there should be transparency. And most importantly, when you're testing these algorithms in a testing setting, the AI performs very well, but it's limited by the data set that it's trained on. So if you want to scale it broadly and apply at a global level, then your algorithm may fail miserably if your data sets are not enriched. So keep in mind the scalability. I would emphasize on intellectual freedom, the research that goes behind making an algorithmic tool should come from an unbiased research. And I mentioned earlier, I'm a strong proponent of education, and I'm a strong proponent of digital literacy. Public awareness is highly required. So folks know what they're using, folks can understand these transparent models, and they can raise flags if they see there is an unintended usage in the works, which in some cases, um, the folks who developed it would have missed. So just building on what Tiago had already mentioned about COVID-19, some of the achievements in ethical dilemmas. So definitely it was the use of artificial intelligence that expedited disease diagnosis and patient management here, at least in the US. I hate the word triage when I'm using it in context of patient, but it's very commonly used here in the US. So telemedicine came front and center. People became very receptive to using telemedicine, and algorithmic tools were built into place where patients were triaged based on artificial intelligence platforms. For example, you'll give your basic readings, feed it in, and an algorithm will triage whether or not you should see a nurse or not, or what kind of service you should get next. Definitely, AI played a huge role in drug development. A lot of folks were experimenting with drug repurposing because we were hit with this pandemic, which we knew nothing about. And there were so many drugs already that were either to be approved by the Federal Drug Administration, the FDA, or already approved. So people were trying to figure out if somehow those drugs could be used to try to manage COVID-19 or even treat it. And of course, combinatorial therapy came from trying out different approaches together with AI. A lot of us are familiar that AI was used for disease forecasting, sort of letting you know where the next epicenter for the disease may be. For monitoring COVID-19 cases and for surveillance. And in certain countries like China, and I think our panel could discuss that from the law and ethics perspective, there is forced surveillance on folks to have them comply or for them to quarantine. And I am not sure how ethical that is. And the data that has been collected at this time, how it could be used or misused in the future. It's a forum on biotechnology. So I want to broadly touch upon other technologies as well and talk about a little bit of disparity and ethical concerns I had regarding that. So as most of you are familiar, when COVID-19 hit, there was suddenly a surge in hospitalizations and the need for ventilators. And Tiago eloquently mentioned how we now have surplus ventilators, but at the time they were limiting. So even in the US, it was not a different situation. So patients were again triaged to understand which patients should get access to ventilators, to urge they should be hospitalized. And there is an instrument called pulse oximeter, and most of you might be familiar with it. Essentially, it's a device that's put on your skin to check the level of oxygenation in your body. So what the data revealed was that these pulse oximeters were trained, or they were tested on predominantly white populations. So they were reading the oxygenation levels of white patients very accurately. But when patients of color went to these hospital settings, the pulse oximeter could not read their oxygenation level as well. So the readings came out higher. And as a result of that, these folks were ineligible to be hospitalized to get to ventilators to save their lives. So this was a gross misuse of technology, biotech, where literally the life and death of an individual depended on a technology that was not widely tested on folks from different backgrounds. We are familiar with contact tracing. You may be in favor of it or against it, but it could be used for quarantining. But then again, there are concerns regarding that because you cannot always rule out false positives and false negatives. And that affects to what level folks should be quarantined. Are you quarantining the right kind of individuals who are tested positive or they are false positives? Or are we letting go of COVID-19 positive individuals because they were tested negative? And a lot of places in North America, like Canada, had been enforcing COVID contact tracing using apps on folks' mobiles, when they entered the country, and they were monitoring their quarantining for 14 days. However, where this data is going to go and what kind of other malware comes with these additional apps, or if these apps give access to third parties to your data, how can that be used or misused in the future? I think that is questionable. I think the silver lining was the ability for the countries to develop vaccine in a short span of 11 months throughout the world. And again, AI was used in vaccine development as well as dissemination. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar, coming from the US perspective, if you're familiar with the Stanford incident. So essentially in the Stanford university system, when the vaccine dissemination happened, it was not an AI-based approach. Most folks misunderstood it. It was more of a statistical-based approach. But the criteria that was used was not quite accurate. So as a result, a lot of folks were favored to get ahead of the line, and folks who were frontline workers who should have been eligible to get vaccine first were bumped down the line. I guess that's not a concern anymore because we have, thankfully, surplus vaccines, but at the time, there was a huge uproar. So I just want you to think about some of these achievements and sort of put and your ethical lens to think about, did we do it right? Or in my belief, there was definitely a scope for much better for an ethical integration of AI in these settings. One thing I mentioned was the data. So data are the foundation of any AI that you build. Data gives us information, knowledge, and that's how we acquire wisdom over time as humans. And the data for AI allows different kinds of analytics, the ones that we do not intend once we're using machine learning. And with the heuristic learning, the machine can take certain parameters that we may not have thought about and be able to do certain things or generate some outcomes which may not be accurate. I have quite a few disturbing examples to share, but in the interest of time, I'll skip those. But I want you to hold on to this thought that data is paramount when you are talking about algorithms and algorithmic accountability.
Professor Shavi, you have about 5 minutes left.
Oh, okay. Thank you for the heads up. So I just wanted to talk about some data disparities, and I'll rush through the slides. These are some data, and I deliberately took these data from last year. So in Italy and United States, initial data in August of 2020 showed that the majority of deaths were happening in elder population. And in America itself, Black and Indigenous Americans, as well as Latinos, were dying more of COVID-19 compared to white races. And this could have been due to the contributing factors like discrimination, limited healthcare access, the fact that most of these workers were frontline workers, or gap in education or income, or not having the right kind of housing so people could not be quarantined effectively and the disease spread. So let me just show up this whole slide and talk about it together. So these populations are vulnerable populations. They are socioeconomically backward to begin with. And as Tiago had briefly mentioned about obesity, these individuals do not have access to greater resources to have a better lifestyle. And they have underlying conditions that make them more liable to get COVID-19 or have a severe outcome. They also may have limited accessibility to COVID-19 testing. They do not trust the healthcare system, so they may not even go there. And they may be limited in their financial resources. And also there is a digital divide, or they may not even have the means of transportation to get to these facilities. However, we are not capturing all this data, or all this data in 2020 was missed. And there are several limitations in the COVID-19 clinical trials that we are doing because they're largely done in larger academic centers where we're predominantly seeing the white populations. Majority of the clinical trials were initially done in USA or Western Europe or Asia, Japan, and China. So not all global population is represented. There was definitely a lack of vulnerable patient groups when initial clinical trials were done. And even the principal investigators, they were underrepresented from racial and ethnic backgrounds. So those voices were not raised. So there's definitely a need for equitable government and public health oversight. And I would just like to make some recommendations to wrap up. So in order to implement AI-based algorithms and we need to account for the following disparities: gender-related, age-related, racial, and ethnic. And especially as they relate to healthcare access, because healthcare access should be made equitable, the utilization of healthcare, and planning of clinical trials for drug and vaccine development going forward for this pandemic, as well as anything else which might hit us in the future. Obrigado, and I'll be ready to take any questions.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much, Professor. It was very insightful. Go ahead, Hugo.
No, I'll just invite the panel members to turn on their cameras and microphones, and please, the stage is yours, Professor Raquel. Thank you.
Thank you so much. For me, it's a privilege to share this session with such magnificent persons in their fields of expertise. Well, it's not my job to do a presentation, so I only want to focus on several key words that Professor Xavi has used that I think they are, well, the key words: preservation, reliability, confidentiality, impartiality and fairness, accountability and transparency, intellectual freedom, digital literacy, telemedicine. The case of pulse oximeter was striking for me. Data as foundation of artificial intelligence and data disparities. I want all of you panelists to talk about, but I have some key questions for everyone. So I begin with my dear colleague Filipa, that is a law professor and the president of our Data Protection Commission. And I want to ask you, within this field and this context, how big data and artificial intelligence impact in law application. I know law is already some concerns, and that has been dealing with them with technology intersection with law, but these data issues regarding healthcare is, well, it's at the heart of our democratic system, and the pandemic has shown that. So, Professor Filipa, you have the floor.
Thank you, Raquel. Good morning or good evening to everybody. I hope you are hearing me in good conditions. First of all, let me say hello to everybody, but particularly to Xavi, whom I heard and listened very carefully to what she has been saying, and I would somehow complement the ethic perspective with the law perspective, in particular in what concerns data protection and privacy law. And actually, Raquel, you were talking about the big data, artificial intelligence, and what kind of impact that does have in our democratic societies and in our lives. And I would say we have several challenges here. I won't say problems, but challenges that are common to all fields in which artificial intelligence can be used, but has a specific and particular impact on what concerns healthcare and what concerns the use of new technologies in this context. First challenge has to do with the multiple sources of personal data collection. Traditionally, we had data subjects actively and voluntarily disclosing their personal data, in particular those related to health. But nowadays, there is a growing passive collection of personal data by the use of apps and wearables. And the lack of awareness of this collection and of its purpose and of its risks on the side of the data subjects is quite impressive. And so it is so important, as it has been said already, the digital education and so to promote this awareness. The other challenge has to do with big data and the fact that um, artificial intelligence managed to re-identify anonymized data. So if we think that we can, in a spirit of promoting information and global information, and in particular to develop science, if we think that it should be spread around the internet, information data, the use of anonymized data in order to do so and to allow it to be freely used has a terrific, terrible impact today because artificial intelligence do manage to transform anonymized data into personal data. And so it is the high risk of disclosure of personal data in its dissemination through the internet, its impact on privacy, on freedom, considering the risks of mass surveillance, of nudging, of manipulation of our will, and of promoting disparities, discrimination between all us. The third challenge has somehow to do with the opacity that machine learning and deep learning technology brings. It really jeopardizes the control over data by data subjects as well as by those who are processing the data, what we call in Europe the data controller or data processing controller. It actually prevents us from avoiding these risks of bias, of hidden nudging, of discrimination. And as Professor Maria do Céu Brandão, an ethics professor, that recently noticed, artificial intelligence, it is really no longer neutral. These new technologies have a specific intentionality and so demand different approaches in order to protect our human rights. In particular, in what concerns health data, well, we have this problem of health data being quite elastic because personal data, almost all personal data, all information about us relate to data, to health, to health, because they are needed to a proper medical diagnosis. Besides, we have the knowledge at the clinical research, medical care, the science in these fields of biotechnology need more than anonymized data. They need data that can be related to people to go through, to accompany them, to monitor the evolution of a disease, of the impact of some kind of health care. And third, we have this big movement, this big agenda of a global health database in order to promote scientific research and scientific evolution. And that it has some kind of impact on our lives. Why? Because we've got the apps, the wearables provided by big tech companies, and they do not know actually what exactly is the purpose, well, an economic purpose for sure, but maybe not just that, an economic purpose that is behind the scientific research aim or behind the healthcare provision. So we actually do not know exactly what we have here. And in times when we have to be aware, in particular in these kind of times that we are living, that public interest, public or global interest cannot prevail at all cost over privacy, over freedom, over dignity of individuals. So in order to achieve some kind of balance between all these important values in society, we really need to promote digital education, to give back data subjects to individuals the control over their personal data. That depends on transparency, as you were saying, of data processing. That depends on the awareness of the risks of this kind of processing of data, and of the freedom, the free will, deciding if we want those data to be reused or not, and whatsoever. And that in particular depends on knowing who is accountable for this data processing, because that's a very important question. Is when we have this idea of an open science database that is spread around the globe through the internet, who is at each moment accountable for what is being done to those data? And finally, we need technology, and we need biotechnology, because it's technology that has to give us the tools to ensure data, the human rights. It is the development of privacy enhancing technologies, the obvious solution to all this. And I would say, well, at the end of the day, technology, biotechnology, science must serve its main purpose, its only purpose, that is the human being.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, I agree with you, but that you know, of course. Then I would ask Professor Doya Salazar, if you can address these topics that Professor Xavi and also Professor Filipe have pointed out, regarding mainly the intention of artificial intelligence, the public interest and privacy, and what if these two things are societal concerns, if you think the society is worried about this, and how to digital literacy and education is a urge in society. If you believe this is an issue, and if also in societal terms, accountability is also crucial to us as a society. You have the floor, Professor.
Okay, thank you so much, Raquel, and thank you so much, Xavi and Filipa, for your words. I think your talks were like great, so thank you so much for them. I think both of you have been talking about education and the need of education. I really think it's like a base in everything, and I think we are not doing it right. Like, I don't know, in the United States, I think it's the same in the whole world, and we think on the technology just like equal to technique, and that is a problem, because technology is much more than just to learn to program something, an algorithm, or just whatever. And you can see in Spain, for example, in schools, they have like some Scratch program and these kind of things, or just they show them how to use Word or PowerPoint or these kind of things. When they think about technology, they think about this technique, about this use of software. And this is not technology, really. You all know, I think artificial intelligence is showing us that this is much more, and really our kids, and not only our kids, but our older people here in each one of the countries should be knowing about the impact of technology, not about technology itself, the technique. It is so important that you start to learn how these companies and governments are using their data, our data, and it's the key. If really these consumers, these patients do not know what are they going to do with their personal data, it's like a big problem. There have been like many cases in Spain also in which people are very, they were like talking a lot in social networks about the use of their personal data, and with like for the part of the government, for example, in the COVID apps, and they really didn't know anything about anonymization of this data. They didn't know anything. They just get that the government are using their personal data for something that they don't know. They don't really get to know, because they didn't get the education needed to understand all this complex world. And that, I think, is the base and is the key. And we should invest in this education in all levels, not just for university people, not just for the kids, for our young people, but also for people that are maybe 70 or 80, and they are also getting the impact of these AI systems. Because we have to realize something is like AI systems are already in our daily life, in many things, not only on hospitals. Of course, there are many tools that are using already in many hospitals in order to take these patients' data in order to, I don't know, do research or just to do some treatments. And really the patient, I mean, they feel like they are in a science fiction world. They like like 10 years ago, they just were seeing all this stuff just in science fiction movies. And nowadays they are just seeing in the on the news, and for them, even in the news, or maybe even on the news and all these reality shows and everything, they just really, they are seeing how these AI systems are on robots like humanoids. And they really think, people, if you go out there and you ask what is an artificial intelligence system, people are still thinking about a humanoid robot, and that walk around and really maybe take over humanity and these kind of things. And sometimes scientists do not realize that people out there are like needed much more education in order to start understanding even like basic things. What is a AI system? What is that? What is it? It's just a software. Just say, and I wanted to say something also about something I think Filipa said, and I think it's quite interesting. I think you said that technology nowadays is not neutral. I totally agree with you, but maybe we have to change a little bit and say, okay, these AI systems and technology itself, at the end of these AI systems, I mean, it's a human. This is still a human. Like, this technology is very dependent on humanity, on humans, on people. And I think we are in a point in which the ones that have to be fair, the ones that should take aware of all these things are still humans. Maybe in the future, these autonomous systems, if we leave these autonomous systems to be really autonomous, maybe we have to say that this technology is neutral, is not, or yes, maybe neutral. But I really think that we have to still care about our own ethics. Keep thinking about not about the ethics of the machine, of the AI systems, because at the end, this is still, at least now, it's just an AI systems very dependent on human. And I really hope that this keeps that way for a long time, still a long time. Okay, I really think that there is another keyword in your list, Raquel, that is also very important, which is like human-centered technology. I think it is like another one of the big keys that we have to keep into our minds to maintain the control over this technology. It is like so important because, as we know, this technology has a specific peculiarity, which is like the possibility to be autonomous in some way in the decision making. But if we keep our systems control some way, and human-centered control is a good way of keep controlling this technology. Another thing to think about, just it is that we don't have to forget that we humans has been the one throughout history that has not been fair, and that is another thing. We are thinking nowadays a lot, and that is so good, about what the bias of the machine, the bias in data, but at the end, this data is the ones that we have spread all around. We are, and that is why these algorithms are being biased, because we ourselves in our history has been like so biased also. So I always say that I think it's interesting because it's like you look at yourself in a mirror and you just reflect, whatever we are as humanity. and that is so good that we start realizing how much, all the bias that we have on humans. And it's a big thing because some of these bias are unconscious bias. We do not know, maybe if we are being at some point, if we are at some situations, if we are being biased or not. And I think this is good, what is happening nowadays, because it's making us realizing all the maybe bad things that we have. And so just to finish with this, I would highlight 3 things. One of these is like there is a big need of educating society in the impact of artificial intelligence, in privacy, in the way the people perceived all of these, and what is big data, what people are, what these big companies and governments are doing with our data. People really need to know with easy words, and it's very possible to do so. So I really say to governments and organizations, whatever, like Odisea, the one in which I work with, do it a lot, to invest a lot in this education, digital education, not technique, impact education in digital, which is one of the keys of our, I hope, of our present and our future, to success in it. And the other one is to really keep this technology human-centered. That is the key. Also, it is very important not to think a lot about these autonomous robots, these autonomous systems, but always, I'm talking about like high-risk systems, not regular systems without any risk, but high-risk systems. And I'm sure that Filipa knows about the new regulation, European regulation on that, that really are very aware with that. They are really keeping the high risk systems like under supervision, like and always human-centered, which is like very important. And I think, and the last thing is like we should be thinking about like do all the things that just Xavi said and Filipa said, do all these things to keep ethics on AI system from design. It is very important before even developing the AI system, start thinking about what is happening with my data. And nowadays there are a lot of tools that are able to take out all the variables of gender, age, or race from our data, but still it's not enough. I know, because the context a lot of times gives more information, but it is necessary to take good care of our data, but all the model also, and what is happening after, but from design is so important. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Eloa. Well, this issue about education is very important, because regarding healthcare, for instance, people are in a very fragile situation when they are asked to give some data. So I believe there has to be some reflection how to educate in times of fragility also. Well, some of the issues that you have addressed gives me to ask for Patricia. Thank you also for being here. To how may or should bioengineers incorporate such concerns when, well, building, thinking these machines, namely how to apply criteria in design about being the most fairness of recollecting data and dealing with data. Patricia, you have the floor.
Good morning to all. Thank you for the invitation. It is really a pleasure to be discussing these so important issues here. First of all, I agree with everything the other colleagues have mentioned, and also with the concerns that we are facing now, that artificial intelligence is in our day by day, in everything that we have. And exactly as Yodia, I don't know if I'm pronouncing correctly the name. I think that the key is education, and it is transversal to all the areas, biotechnical engineers, and also in economics, managers, in all sectors. I think that the education related to artificial intelligence is the key word. And I think that we have made some efforts in Europe, at least. I don't know what is have been doing in the United States, on other parts of the world, but at least in Europe, we have been trying to provide to the common citizen information regarding that. One of these examples is the elements of AI, which was launched by University of Helsinki and was translated for several languages, and has more than 700,000 people doing the introduction course of in elements of AI, which is just a basic course just to tell information about where the artificial intelligence is in our days. On the other hand, I'm professor at the Nova School of Business and Economics, and we have launched last year, for instance, a course in business analytics, where we try to have some translators from the engineer sector to the management sector. And one of the main issue that we have there is precisely the artificial intelligence ethics, how we can deal with the data privacy and governance, and also to not to develop biased systems. So since the beginning, students are aware of these impacts, because I know that we are working on regulation in the European Union, but many of the companies are using inside workers, okay, with the data that they have. So I don't know if this regulation can do some work inside the company. So it's I think we can try to combat this using the education first, okay? So since the potential users and of these technologies are going to be students that goes from the universities that we have, so if they are aware of this, I think it will become more easy to implement those guidelines and to have some boundaries regarding the transparency of the systems, and also the fairness of the systems. I'm thinking about a simple system with the credit for a common citizen. Okay, so of course the decisions that we have and what we are going to use to teach the machine how to produce the result, if the credit is going to be consistent or not, are biased already, because they are human decisions, historical human decisions, and despite the probably they don't know they are biased, but they are going to be, because there are some groups that are not represented in our data sample, and therefore the decisions have some kind of biased to the common element in the data set. So if the ones that are going to use those tools are aware of those risks, can mitigate the effects that the use of those technologies have. Okay.
you, Patricia. I think I have to give the floor to Professor Xavi to comment on so many issues. For me, bottom line is people are the key issue, people and their ethics, because people are at the beginning of artificial intelligence. But we want to hear you, Professor. You have the floor.
Well, thank you. I do want to comment on a question that came through the chat as well when Tiago was wondering about if truly neutral AI is a possibility. So it would definitely be one of my dreams. I believe in AI empowering humans. So, and very great points were raised by all the panelists. And I do want to focus again and mention that there is a need for diverse data sets, because only by diversifying data sets and limiting identifiers, we can enrich the algorithms and help them perform the way they were intended to perform. And all the algorithms that we want to put into place, especially in the healthcare setting, and I would like to extend in any other setting, because socioeconomic disparities exist no matter what, if you're looking at the finance sector or retail sector. So the AI should be built, it should be human-centric, and it should be ethical by design. So after we see the outcome of an AI algorithm, we should not go back to thinking, oh, we did not think about this ahead of time. We should put all the AI ethics frameworks into place while building and testing these algorithms on diverse data sets, so they remain scalable and they can be tools can be applied to masses. And I definitely like that everybody on the panel echoed the need for digital education, because each one of us have our own biases. Each one of us have our strengths, the areas that we focus on. And when we have any project, those are the aspects we tend to focus more on. So I would like to encourage everyone to have diverse perspectives on their teams, so they can bring in a different lens to incorporate in building ethical AI by design. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. I have a last question for all the panelists. I don't know if this is correctly translated into English, but I don't want to be a prophet of disgrace, but I want to ask you, every one of you, in your field of expertise, what can law, biotechnology, ethics can contribute whenever if the AE becomes autonomous and evolves into a technical or a technology that's outside human hands? What, in your field of expertise, do you think it can be done? I know it's a very difficult question, but it's a possible scenario. I'm sorry.
It doesn't matter. It's a very difficult name, so don't worry about that. Okay, I think there is a possible scenario, but it depends on what we do nowadays. So that's why it is very important that we act nowadays in this. Okay, we shouldn't think this. We shouldn't be thinking that this is like something to be done in the future, but our future depends on the actions that we do nowadays. See, nowadays, if nowadays we leave these AI systems to evolve that way, in giving these AI systems like too many rights, as as maybe, and think about the leave this technology to evolve with all its capabilities, which means it could be autonomous, it could be acting by itself. Okay, at the end, it's going to go out of our hands. It's I really think that nowadays we don't have to think about if we are able to do something, but we have to think about if we should do something as humans, you know. And, you know, I think that is the key. If we really nowadays, in this moment of our history, leave this technology to go by itself in some way, just to see what is going to happen in the next future, we are going to have a big problem, really. So it is nowadays, I'm not telling that we have to put a lot of limits. I really don't like to limit a lot this technology, but I think that we really have to put some limits, at least some of them. Just think a lot. Maybe we have to, you know, the European Union has done, the European Commission are putting this regulation on cases of use. They are not regulating the technology itself. They are just regulating some cases of use. That is good, because you let the technology evolve in some way, and you are limiting just some specific cases of use or use cases. And I think that it is very important not to let our imagination to get to that scientific movies, you know, but just try to see what is going to be good for humans, good for humanity, and go that way. It's not easy, but I think now is the moment to have a lot of, you know, to think a lot about this and to see what do we want as humans to be the evolution of AI systems.
Thank you. Well, Patricia or Filipa, please.
Yeah, just to comment that I completely agree, because behind the machine, there is a human being. So if the intention is to produce something that is good, so the machine is going to proceed in that way. But otherwise, if we have some bad intentions with what we are developing, so it's important to have these kind of constraints, minimizing the risks, and to regulate the use of the technology on that way. Not the technology itself, because I think that the technology can be useful in several different applications, but the use of it.
Thank you. Filipa?
Just to say that I also agree with what have been said. I just would add that law right now, as Idoia was saying, law right now must be quite predictive. That is, being careful in what is regulating, what the rules are, being careful thinking about those rules. And in that sense, someone was asking about the Commission framework, the European Commission framework on artificial intelligence that it has been discussed publicly. I would say that it needs a few improvements, because maybe it is too optimistic. And so we need, because of course European Commission tries to get some balance between economic interests, economic development, market, and human rights. And I think it's maybe too optimistic and needs to think a little bit more about what we can do with safety for everybody. So thank you.
Well, before giving the floor to go again, it was my privilege to share this session. I learned a lot. It was very, very interesting and insightful. Thank you all for your contributions. And thank you, Hugo, for inviting me for such an easy panel to share. Thank you.
Obrigado.
Thank you, Professor Raquel, and thank you to all the panel members. A special thank you to all of you, but please let me just really highlight Xavi's commitment, because it's 3 a.m. in the USA and she's still online with us and speaking brilliantly about AI, ethics, law, and biotech. So thank you all.